Hola buena gente de la Tierra, acá Ariel Contreras Esquivel, bienvenidos una vez más a esta sección de mi canal llamada En Conversaciones. Hoy tenemos a un invitado súper especial que ha participado en un videojuego de una de las franquicias más importantes en la industria audiovisual, que además es una de esas franquicias donde quien no como compositor hubiera querido participar haciendo la música. Estamos hablando del videojuego Hogwarts Legacy, es decir, un videojuego basado en el lore de Harry Potter. Esta sección en mi canal, como ya les comenté anteriormente, está destinada a que nosotros podamos abrir nuestra perspectiva, poder aprender de otras experiencias de compositores que ya se han establecido y que ya llegaron a los lugares a donde a nosotros nos gustaría llegar de manera profesional. Entonces hoy traemos a este invitado súper especial llamado Scott Rakosi, que ha hecho parte de la música del videojuego Hogwarts Legacy. Él nos va a contar un poco cómo fueron sus comienzos, cómo empezó a hacer música, cómo empezó su carrera como compositor y además cómo fue que dentro de esa carrera como compositor llegó a la empresa que hizo este videojuego Hogwarts Legacy y cómo se involucró en este proyecto. Así que sin más, vamos a ver qué nos cuenta nuestro querido invitado de hoy, Scott Rakosi. Okay, Scott, again, good to have you here. For start, I would love to know your story. I would love to know how you started, but from the very beginning. I mean,
Oh, from the very beginning.
yeah.
Oh,
How did
geez,
you
Louise.
became a
Oh,
composer? And then, how do you get into film? And how do you get into video games mainly?
sure. So I mean, I started doing music and everything back when I was around 3 years old. I was doing piano lessons and everything. My mom had enrolled me in piano lessons at the age of 5. And we took the Suzuki lessons. So the Suzuki method is more like listening and hearing, interpreting, as opposed to like reading the notes and everything. So I'd be more listening and feeling how music should be portrayed and whatnot. And then reading came after that. So I did that for about a good solid 7 years. And I felt like I just got stagnant. I just got really bored. I had done all the classical stuff, learned all this stuff. We had started doing a little bit of jazz and doing more contemporary stuff. But I just was bored. I was so tired of doing stuff that I didn't care about, nothing that really, spoke to me. Until it was actually about that time is when my brother got an N64. And I think that was 97? I think that's when he picked one up. And that completely changed my entire life as far as music goes, because I was just so enthralled, not only just because of gaming, because I love gaming and everything, but the music that these games were all doing were just so fantastic and so incredible. I mean, listening to like the GoldenEye soundtrack, listening to the Ocarina of Time soundtrack, Majora's Mask, Banjo-Kazooie, Banjo-Tooie, Donkey Kong 64, all of these games all had this wonderful influence on me to the point of where I was doing a lot of ear training, listening to those scores, and then taking that and playing it on the piano. And so that's where I kind of started developing my ear training, was from video games, of all things. And so I started learning all these fun songs, and the love of music was like reinvigorated. I wasn't doing just classical music anymore. It was now like fun music that I actually want to do. I love playing this music. Like, let's play, Spiral Mountain from Banjo-Kazooie. Let's figure out how to play, the Song of Healing from Majora's Mask. And so learning all that stuff, it started creating this urgency, this love and desire to like, maybe I ought to do this for a living. Maybe I should do this for a career. And actually the biggest point was later on, I eventually picked myself up a PS2, and I had gotten Metal Gear Solid 2. And the first time I heard Harry Gregson Williams' score for Metal Gear Solid, I was like, I have to do this. This is the path I want to do. I want to do film composing, video game composing, anything within this medium. And that score was just so impactful for me. And then, of course, there were some other scores as well, like Final Fantasy IX, like the finale of that by Nobuo Uematsu, like just beautiful orchestration, everything. Like the first time I actually cried as a kid from a video game and everything. All these little elements were just so impactful and so driving this passion and desire to become a film composer. So in high school, luckily I had a choir director that saw this desire, saw this passion, and like got my parents, called my parents up. We all sat down one night, in the music room, and we kind of talked about my future. Talked about like, all right, my choir director Darcy Reese. She was like, "Hey, this kid's got some talent. We gotta channel this. We gotta do something. How can we do this?" And so, my parents and I were all trying to think of what we could do and everything. And she's like, all right, we got to get you a computer. We got to get your own computer, some sort of, notation program, recording software, something just to get you going. And so my parents and I, we split 50-50. We picked myself up an iMac G5 back in 2005. And then I started with GarageBand. That was my first introduction into learning how to work with MIDI, working with software instruments, learning automation and all that fun stuff. So this was back in 2005. I think I was, I would have been 17, 16 years old, somewhere around there. And so then I just kind of started picking it up, started figuring out like, okay, this is how I work with automation. This is how I do volume stuff, how to write that all in. How do I make my strings sound more realistic? And so I would start, figuring out how to do little tips and tricks of like how to make my strings sound good, how to make my piano sound good, and this is all rudimentary. I'm just figuring this all out as I go along. No instructions, no mentors or anything, I'm just figuring it out. Yeah, no YouTube at that point. Yeah, YouTube hadn't even been a thing yet. Heck, even Facebook was just about to start the next year. And so after I finished up high school and everything, I had taken lessons from Gregory Tyson. He was a jazz pianist. He had played on Broadway and everything, learning jazz. So I did a lot of jazz stuff. And then I also had learned some fundamental virtual instrument writing from another composer down in the Minneapolis area. So I'm from the Midwest, I should say. And so I was working in the Minneapolis Twin City area, in Minnesota. So after I finished up, high school and everything, graduated, it's like, all right, I'll head off to college. Went off to BYU, Idaho, out in Idaho. And that's when I started kind of diving more into virtual instruments. I had picked up my first virtual instrument pack, which was called Motu Symphonic. So Mark of the Unicorn, Motu. So that's my first legit software instrument that I had picked up. I was like, oh, this sounds really nice. So I'm going to work with this to see how I can make myself sound realistic. And then I had picked up Logic Express. So in between GarageBand and Logic Pro, there was a middle software at the time called Logic Express. I was like, sweet, I'll pick this up. And that kind of got my feet wet into Logic Pro. Eventually, the year later, I would pick up Logic Pro officially and then then be with Logic Pro forever. But that was kind of the beginning of learning how to work with software instruments, how to make it sound more realistic, with French horns, with choir, learning all the articulations, changing out all the articulations to make stuff sound more realistic. And that was kind of the beginning of how everything kind of started off. And then I went and did a mission for the church. I'm a member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. So I took a 2-year, missionary work out in Romania, came back. And then for 2 years, I kind of figured out what I wanted to do, started writing more music and everything. And then I was told I should go to BYU down in Provo, out in Utah. Because apparently they had a pretty good program. I was like, sweet. I was looking at, Berkeley School of Music out in Boston. I was even looking like USC Thornton School of Music, in California. Heck, I was even checking out, Columbia in Chicago. For just like a school of music program. But of all of them, surprisingly, the Utah one was the cheapest. And I don't know, there's something that just drew me there that I was like, all right, I'm going to go here. Now, the price was great and everything, but there's something else that drew me there. And who would have thought that later on that I would find an incredible mentor to help me, push me, and get to where I am today. And so that mentor was Sam Carden. I had taken all these amazing classes, Ron Saltmarsh, an incredible director of the music program there. He really helped maneuver me around and everything. And I got to meet with Sam Carden. Sam Carden, for those who don't know, has done tons of film, soundtracks and everything. But most notably for the World of Warcraft series and the Overwatch series. And so he kind of took me under his wing, kind of helped me, kind of direct me how to kind of maneuver, this wacky world of music and making a living doing this. And actually introducing me to like doing, production music library stuff, doing library music that'd be licensed, and get royalties and everything. And through him, he was able to kind of get me situated with a lot of great connections. Like he got me an offer down at Blizzard, for an assistant composing position with Derek Duke and the whole team down there. And then he also got me set up with a recording studio up in downtown Salt Lake City called Huge Studios. And so I decided to go with Huge Studios because I already know a lot of the people there. Chance Thomas was there, Mike McDonough, Mike Green, Mike Fox, all these amazingly talented people, just for all these amazing connections. Like they had this beautiful studio all set up, ready to go. And so they hired me on board to kind of be this jack of all trades pretty much, where I was able to do ADR sessions, do recording sessions. If we need to compose music, we could write music. If we need someone to set up and tear down, for recording sessions, I could do that, be an assistant mixing engineer, all these things. And so I was able to work, for that year and a half or so there before I got shut down, unfortunately. I was able to work with clients like Netflix, Universal, Paramount, Fox. We were doing video game stuff with Hexany Audio. We were doing video game stuff with Arena.net for Guild Wars. It was a ton of fun, and I had learned so much stuff. Unfortunately, our boss at the time, he was running a $200 million Ponzi scheme. And so, the feds came in, they shut everything down. We all lost our jobs. And so I was pretty much, starting from zero. I had literally nothing. So I was like, all right, this was end of 2018, beginning of 2019, when this all kind of happened. And so I was like, all right, I'm just going to go freelancing. I'm just going to just go straight into it. Figure this all out. We'll make this all work. And that first year, I had some contacts already. I had clients and everything. I was building up my rapport and everything. And that first year, I brought in about $50,000. Actually, it was more like 35 after taxes, which was like, okay, all right. With the startup costs and everything like that's that's all right. But the next year, I was like, all right, let's see if we can double that. Let's see if we can make $70,000, maybe $80,000, next year. And luckily, I had made about $87,000 the following year. That would have been 2020. And, it was just all these crazy things were happening. Chance Thomas had reached out to me. He's like, hey, we got this Ubisoft project with doing this game called The Settlers. Would you like to contribute some music for that? So I did. And that money helped pay for the down payment of our house in 2020. And then later on the next year, it's like, all right, let's see if we can break it to the six-figure, range, see if we can get past the $100,000 range. And so I managed to do that the following year. Surprisingly, I don't know how, but, just clients that are coming to me, be like, hey, let's have you do sound design stuff for this. Let's have you do some dialogue editing for this. Let's have you do original music for all this. And so just a bunch of clients just started appearing out of nowhere, to kind of break that, six-figure barrier. And then out of the blue, my buddy Peter Murray called me up. Peter Murray and I, we went to college together and everything at BYU. He called me up in 2021, and he's like, hey, we're hiring contractors to come help out with this new game that we're doing for Warner Brothers. And this was like back in like August or something. And so I was like, oh, sure. Yeah. Well, what do I need to do? It's like, oh, just like, do an interview, all that fun stuff, all that stuff. We'll get that all taken care of. So I did all that, sent off my demos and all that stuff. They called me up, with Jaren. Jaren called me up. Really loved Jaren. Jaren's phenomenal. We had an awesome time. Really hit it off really well. And then we had a second interview with the whole team, and the whole team is incredible, amazing. Loved all of them. And then they hired me on board to work with Avalanche Software as a contractor. And so I was brought on as a software designer, or not a software, a sound designer. This was back in October. So that's when I started my contract as a sound designer for Hogwarts Legacy. And then, fast forward to now, it's like, all right, 4 months in, give or take, Jaren's like, hey, we got a bunch of cutscenes. We got a bunch of music that needs to be done for all these cutscenes in these classes. Can we have you do the music, for Hogwarts Legacy? And I'm like, all right, sure, And so I did all this music, and here we are today. So,
Oh, that's really nice. It sounds like all the story was like really organic. It's like one thing led to the next thing, and the
Oh
next
yeah.
thing led to the next thing. Like I don't know. I was wondering, did you at any part of your career has had like a struggle or like
Oh,
a like no cows for the year or something like that? Do you have
oh
any
yes.
stories, or and how did you get over that? That
Oh
I know
yeah.
that's like a really common thing in composers sometimes, because I've read some stories of established composers with like, I don't know, 15 years working constantly, but suddenly no project for 2 years, and oh, what are we going to do now?
Yes. Oh
If you
yeah.
have a story like
Yeah,
that.
that was pretty much the entire year of 2019. That was what was happening, because I just lost my job. I was just figuring out my wife was working as a receptionist, and so that was kind of paying the bills most of the time, for our living and everything. And so I was really struggling, trying to like find clients, trying to find work, trying to get the ground under my feet again, because it was literally ripped underneath all of us. Like we were so flabbergasted when our boss was, caught, doing this Ponzi scheme, the feds come in and everything. And we're like, oh my gosh, what are we going to do for a living? And so that was a really tough point. Even before that, actually, now that I think before that, when I had graduated from college, I didn't have a job all set up. I had no job whatsoever when I graduated from college. And for 7 months, I was living with my in-laws out in the Bay Area in California. And I was just struggling every day, constantly searching, applying to any job, whether it's sound design, music, something. Gosh, those were probably the roughest 7 months of my life, because I'm just stuck here. And it's like, the thing is, it's like, as a composer, or even as an artist, people kind of look at you a little bit differently. They're just like, oh, you can't really make a living as an artist. You're going to be poor for the rest of your life. Like, what's the point? Get an actual job. Become like, I don't know, an accountant, or, a software, developer or something, actually make a difference. And I always hated that. I don't think, my any of my relatives or anything thought that, but I think it was just me. I think I was thinking that, and I was thinking I'm going to be the disappointment if I don't do something. And so for those 7 months, I really struggled to like try and find a job, try to find something. And my wife, the funny thing is, like, afterwards, she told me, like, yeah, within 7 months, if you had nothing, we were going to just get up, leave, didn't matter where, we are just going to get out of here. Because I think she saw that I was really struggling and just really having a difficult time. Because I felt like I was being a disappointment for my family, for myself, to my wife and everything. And so that struggle was just so much. But at the same time, it really pushed me. And now I'm kind of seeing the miracles of, being persistent, being diligent, really trying to stretch myself, trying to grasp at anything. And eventually, there's this help that will eventually come, after all that you do and everything, some divine intervention will come in and help you out. And luckily, Sam, he had helped me out in getting, a couple of gigs kind of set up, with Blizzard, with huge studios. I even had another job out in Georgia, for like a casino game company of some sort. All these things started happening, and so it was kind of wild and wacky. It's like you have to struggle a little bit to really appreciate, what you're given. And I remember the year 2019. We were living at my in-laws' cabin. We decided to get out of our apartment. We decided to live in the cabin, go and save up money essentially for a down payment on a house. And I know that was really rough on my wife. She did not like living at the cabin. For me, I was like, whatever. But at the same time, I was under that impression, like, oh my gosh, I don't want to be disappointed. I don't want to disappoint my in-laws. I don't want to disappoint my parents. I want to make this a reality. I want to make this a dream. And so struggled for a whole year, drumming up work and everything. And luckily things worked out. I started getting some really great clients. Like, one of my favorite clients to work with is Devin Graham, with Devin Supertramp. And so him and I, it started back, doing peanuts, for his music, doing music for his videos. But eventually we started doing some really awesome stuff, and that stuff started taking notice, and started getting more clients because of that. And then eventually, later on, now doing Hogwarts Legacy and everything, like who would have thought, that would have been such a crazy opportunity to have that come out of the blue. So there are moments in life where composers, artists in general, you're gonna struggle, but they make you stronger. They make you really dive in and be more passionate about your art. Be more, desire what you want in this life. And sometimes we need that. Sometimes we get a little complacent, we get a little too content. And so life somehow just has to throw a wrench into that to, shake you up a little bit. So,
Yeah,
so yeah.
actually, I found myself sometimes with that struggle, and I feel like those moments made me like a better composer because I used that time to improve my skills.
Yeah.
And like finding my own voice because I wasn't like just doing the music that it was requested for the project, right? So it was
Exactly.
like,
Yeah.
okay, this is me, right? It's perfect. So you said like in 2019 you had another struggle because you were talking about your 7 month struggle from the start. So how did you get out of that struggle in 2019? When you came back to the business again?
Man, that's a really good question. I wish I knew. I wish I knew how I got out of that. I think I was just so determined to like I think all right, now I'm thinking about it. It's like, okay, I decided to change my perspective of like how I should get clients. I started doing this thing where I would start reaching out to clients, and I'd pretty much just be a one-stop shop where I'll do your music, I'll do your dialogue editing, I'll do your sound design, I'll do your final mix, I'll do all that stuff for you. And so I started doing more for commercials, local people around here. There's tons and tons of production going on in Utah alone. So I started reaching out to these people, and luckily I had friends that were already doing these productions that I would reach out to, and I would start doing these little projects, and over time, start getting bigger and bigger clients from that. And so I would start, set up it would be the first time client rate. That's what I would set it as, where it's like $750. I will do anything and everything for you. I just want to establish a relationship. Let's just get to know each other. Let's just have an awesome time having fun doing this project. And surprisingly, like 90% of the time, those clients always return back with more work for me to do. I remember one in particular. His company was called His Grace Production. And we had done this one project, and luckily it was from a buddy of mine, Eric Thane, who got me connected with him. We had done this one project, it was a passion project for him and everything, but somehow that turned into doing tons and tons of more work with him. And that kind of worked out for a lot of things. Actually, I should say a lot of these connections came from Eric Thane, because Eric Thane has a cinema mastery course. And so he has all these students and all these amazing cinematographers that want, original music for their projects. And so he would kind of usher them towards my way. And so we would establish relationships that way. So that's how we kind of started getting things going, especially in 2020. Like that was the peak of like a lot of stuff happening for that. I was trying to think of other elements, but that was kind of the big one where it's like first time client rate, do everything, and most of the time they would always come back with bigger and more projects for me to do. Yeah, that's pretty much how it went. So,
And what about video games? Because you're not talking about video games now, right? How did you
oh yeah,
think back to video games?
yeah, video games is another weird thing. I had done a couple of video games back in college, but nothing up until that point. It's kind of strange how that all kind of happened, because I love video games. Like that's been my first love. I would always love to do music for video games, sound design for video games, and everything. But I just hadn't gotten into that realm. I hadn't, like I even went to GDC, for the Gang Awards back in 2017, met a bunch of amazing people. But yeah, I just never got into it, never found the right people to connect with. Until last year, where surprisingly I had done a bunch of stuff for like Red Games. I had done some stuff for like Crayola and whatnot, so like sound design stuff for that. Just can't get my feet wet. And then out of the blue, this Korean company contacted me out of nowhere. It was like, hey, we want to do some cyberpunk music. Like, can you do some cyberpunk music for one of our games? I was like, sweet. I luckily had done cyberpunk kind of stuff for one of Devin Supertramp's projects for Fast and the Furious, for an ad for that. So I was like, awesome, yes. And so doing music for that. And then another project came out of the blue with Chance Thomas. It was called Roguebook. He just contacted me out of the blue. He was like, hey, we want some more additional music for this. Can you do some music for me? I'm swamped with doing a bunch of other stuff. I'm like, sure, yeah. So luckily Chance had me do some music for him. And then another project came out of the blue where Chance was contacted by somebody. He's like, hey, I'm retired from doing music. I've got this amazing composer, J. Scott Riccozzi. He can help you do that. And so I did some more music for this other, like, it's like another deck builder kind of game. And then out of the blue was a roommate from way back from BYU, Idaho days. He contacted me. He's like, hey, I'm working on this really cute, fun game called World's Worst Handyman. Like, would you like to do some music for it, do some sound design for it? And so when I first saw it, I was like, yes, I would absolutely love to. But at the same time, I was also working on Hogwarts Legacy. So my time was really divided at that time. And so I really couldn't focus on the World's Worst Handyman stuff because I was doing Hogwarts. So it wasn't until like once Hogwarts had finished up, I was like, all right, I can finally focus on this, finish this up and everything. And it turned out really fantastic. I think it's still in beta. I know they got a demo for you to play and everything on Steam. But anyway, so that should be hopefully coming out soon. And then of course, Hogwarts Legacy, like that was the biggest game I've done since. And who would have thought like a AAA title game of all things, of course. I've never done a AAA title game. I've been a part of the recording process and all that stuff, with recording strings, choir, brass, and everything for other AAA title games, but not writing music for myself for this game, for a AAA title game. And that was a completely different beast, but I loved it. Loved every second of that. It was, golly day, it was amazing. It was so awesome.
Perfect. Composer career topic.
Oh, yeah.
So it's very interesting how your story was built because most of the composers I know build their careers out of or Berkeley or UCLA or just from Los Angeles,
Yeah,
So,
yeah.
you not being there is like a very different, great, like a diamond experience that we can learn a lot about. So the next question is about that. Thinking nowadays on this global way to work that you can work remotely or like anywhere from anywhere, right? You can do
Yep.
like anything from anywhere. um, Thinking of these advantages that the technology brings to us now, do you think it's like or what do you think about being in LA to build a career or not being in LA? And more else, this for a final thought on this is
Yeah.
not living even in the States or Canada for building a composer career.
Oh boy, let's see. The thing is like I had somebody else ask me this as well. Like, is there any advantages to living in LA? And I'm like, yes, there's always going to be the advantage of living in LA. You have the connections right there, within, a stone's throw reach of you. To be able to just reach out, to a bunch of people. Everybody wants to make it down there in LA. And so there's always going to be that draw for a lot of composers. Like, oh, if I want to make it as a composer, I got to go to LA because that's where all the work is. And for the most part, yes. I mean, a lot of my friends, they're assistant composers to the top composers. And so they're, in the trenches working, doing all that fun stuff. And, they're writing music, for these amazing composers. And so, yes, there's always going to be that draw, like you should go to LA if you want to make a living as a composer. But there is so many success stories of composers outside of LA that are making killing being a composer. I just think of here in Utah alone, Like, for example, I mean, we got Sam Carden, with Overwatch and with World of Warcraft and everything. But we also have, our other buddy, Lyle Moore. And so people are like, who's Lyle Moore? I'm like, all right, he did the World Cup theme for 2014. He did, the NBA ESPN theme. He has done the Judge Judy theme. He's done tons of trailers, for like Mission Impossible Fallout, for Maleficent. Like, he's an incredible composer, and like, he's just here, just in Utah. He's like 40 minutes away from me, and he's just amazing. He's so incredibly talented. And the thing is that you're gonna find people that are just really successful because they have connections. With him, it was mostly because of Sam. Sam was able to hook him up with a production library called LA East, or they called it Nonstop, which was a music production library that had worked closely with Warner Chappell. And so they were able to do a bunch of recordings and everything, at LA East and everything. And so that's where Lyle kind of got everything going. I mean, he also worked with Chuck Myers, who is one of the main composers for Hogwarts Legacy. He was doing additional music with Chuck on a bunch of video game stuff before Lyle decided to go ahead and do his own thing. And of course, you had Chance Thomas. He's just up, in Bountiful, just an hour north of here. And he, he's one of the biggest video game composer giants in the industry. Like, he's got so many credits to his names for all the games that he's worked on, and he's just an incredibly nice and just a charismatic fellow, and just full of wealth and knowledge. And so he's got all these connections and everything to kind of work on projects that he wants to work on. And so, yeah, you don't have to live in LA to make a living. It's mostly, I would say LA is a great place to network. But I don't know if it's a great place to live. So, I hear the stories of a lot of composers where they're like, yeah, I can't raise a family here in LA, so I'm going to move out. And the funny thing is, a lot of people get their, go in the trenches, do the work and everything, but they'll eventually just like head out somewhere else. Like, I have a buddy named Ben Hoff. He used to work at Bear McCreary's place. I forget what it's called. As an orchestrator, but now he lives in Missouri, and he's orchestrating for Pinar Toprak for all her films and everything, as an orchestrator. So it's like you could work anywhere. It's just a matter of who you connect with, how you network, and everything. And so luckily, there's a lot of conventions to help composers be able to network and reach out to certain directors, producers, game designers, whoever, and eventually collaborate on a fun project together. You don't have to be in the same city. You could be, thousands of miles apart. I look at, the incredible people that did the Skyscraper game from Korea. Like, who would have thought, like, out of the blue, they contacted me, and we had just an awesome rapport. Like, they're just so fantastic to work with. And it just came out of the blue. Like, I have no idea where it came from, but it just happened. I think about Zach Heed, I forget how to say his last name. Another phenomenal composer, great influencer, on social media and everything. Like, he gets most of his projects just from social media. Like, he doesn't have to be he's in LA, but he's moving because he doesn't have to be in LA for all the projects that he does. Like, he doesn't have to be, talking to people face to face. It's just mostly how we're doing it, just doing Zoom calls, phone calls, emails, or whatnot. And luckily, thank goodness, there's technology like this to make this even possible in the first place. So, like, for example, like with Hogwarts Legacy, like, I was all remote, and surprisingly, once COVID had hit, they had gone all remote. So about half of the development was all done remotely, which says a lot about like making a AAA title game of that caliber and everything. Like, you don't have to have an office. You can make everything from home. And so I had like a remote setup right here. I would go ahead, transfer all my files, do all the stuff and everything all remotely. And it just made it so fun and so easy to do.
So now, what was the best advice you got on your career, and what was the worst advice you got on your career as a composer?
Man, best advice and worst advice.
Yeah.
Gosh, I'm not gonna lie, this is a really tough question. I was reading through these. I was like, I do not know. I do know one. I do know one. That's from Sam. Is that he never says no to a project. And that
That's
is
great.
one
That's a
thing.
good advice or a bad advice?
I did it. It's a double-edged sword. That's what it is. You have no idea, right? It's great, because you never know where these clients or where these directors or producers are going to go. It's you work on this small little short film. You're like, sweet, awesome. That was a ton of fun. We established a rapport. A year or so later, they come back. They're like, hey, we're doing a full feature film of this short. Like, do you want to be a part of that? It's weird to think of, like, what was I gonna say? Shoot. Yes. Oh, the idea of saying no to projects, because this is the other side of things. Like, you have no idea how much work you're gonna get yourself involved in. If you don't say no to this project, because it could be a really massive project. And so you're just working your butt off for pennies. You might, for a full feature film, if they only have $4,000 to give you, you're like, all right. But the thing is, like, you're hoping that this relationship will be awesome, that they'll come back with another project, a bigger project with a bigger budget and everything. And for the most part, that usually is the case. Like with my one client, like Bamboo HR, like, they always come back. I had first worked with them back in 2017, which surprisingly was with Matt Heater. If anybody doesn't know Matt Heater, he's the younger brother of John Heater. John Heater is Napoleon Dynamite. And so Matt had reached out to me back in 2017 to help do this one little project, for Bamboo HR. And so it was fun, loved it and everything. And then it wasn't actually until like 2019 that I had reached out back to them, because I just lost my job, decided to, reach out, talk to them, see like, hey, is there anything I can help out with? And from 2019 until now, like, we had just done all these amazing projects. And the thing is like, they're a big company. They can pay my rates. That's an unusual thing to find. Most clients usually don't have a big budget to pay your rates, unless they're with a huge corporation of some sort, and you're just doing like corporate music or something. I don't know. But that was the one advice from Sam, is like, never say no to a project. And so I've kind of carried that along, where I was like, all right, I'm not going to say no. There are some limitations. There are some, stipulations where it's like, I just can't do this if I'm just way too swamped with other projects, of course. There's always that. Or it's just not worth my time. I'll send it off to another guy that can do the job, that's more in their wheelhouse or something like that. I've only done that a few times. Most of the times I'll do it myself just because of quality control. But there are some times where it's like, I can't do it, but I know someone that can. And so I'll send them off, and they usually do an awesome job, and the client's always happy. So yes, so never say no to a project. But as for bad advice, boy, I can't think of any bad advice, unfortunately.
Or okay, so before getting into the Hogwarts Legacy,
Right.
do you have any advice that you could give to aspiring composers outside of these main big countries where the industry is already big?
Yeah.
How can they start? How can they break into the industry, or any type of advice you can come up with for these composers?
Right. So I think the biggest thing that helped me to get to where I am now is I had really studied and established trying to write my music as best as possible with virtual instruments. I know that's a big task for a lot of composers that don't have a whole lot of money, but like, I didn't have a whole lot of money starting out as well. I just would pick up instruments and I was like, oh, I need this instrument to help me write this particular style and theme and everything. And then eventually it just kind of grows because you get more clients and everything. But I had always established of writing my music as best as possible with virtual instruments, because most of the time clients are not going to have a budget to require an entire orchestra to be recorded and everything. So you have to write your best stuff. And luckily, I had started doing kind of more of emulations of other composers to kind of figure out how did they write, how did they score stuff. You have some composers that whip out like the actual scores, read through them and everything, be like, oh, you can see what's happening here in this measure. Oh, we got this German augmented sixth kind of happening here. Oh, we kind of see we got some polychordal stuff happening there. But for me, it was more listening. I think this comes back to the whole Suzuki method that I was taught growing up. Whereas like I was listening to hearing like, okay, this is the colors that this composer is using. This is how he's able to get this from this chord progression to this chord progression through a variation of all these transitions to get there. And so I started kind of emulating those and kind of implementing those into my own scores. So I started doing a lot of stuff with like Danny Elfman, Harry Gregson Williams, John Powell, Thomas Newman, John Williams, Hans Zimmer, figuring out how can I make my stuff sound like that. And that kind of started, this kind of snowball effect of getting bigger clients because like, oh, he can do this. Oh, he could try this. Another thing is I established myself as not being pigeonholed into a single style of music. I think some composers, they get stuck in a particular style. That's what they're called up to do every single time. Like, hey, you know how to do this style really well. Let's have you do this and only this. Where me, I was like, no. I want to try out cyberpunk. I want to try out ambient music. I want to try out, full John Williams stuff. I want to do all these things just so if a client comes to me and is like, hey, we've got this project, it's in this style. Can you do this? But like, oh yeah, heck yeah, of course I can do that. Hence the whole never say no to a project, right? Because I've already prepared myself. I'm already established. I can do this. Like, my client Devin, we had just finished up a project a couple weeks ago for a certain thing, and it was in a wheelhouse that I hadn't done in a very, very long time, but I had done it, and so I was able to write 11 minutes of music for this project, and it turned out so awesome. It was so cool, and it's stuff that I've always wanted to do. But luckily, I had already established all that stuff beforehand because I had done a bunch of stuff before, in that kind of style, this genre and everything. And so I was able to whip this up, in about a week or so. And we just both love it. It was just so fun. So having awesome, stellar demos, really understanding and learning the scores from the people that you want to be like. I wanted to be like Harry Gregson Williams and John Powell. So it's like I was starting to learn that kind of stuff. And then I think the other thing is a piece of advice that I got from Grant Kirkhope, who is the composer for GoldenEye, Perfect Dark, Banjo-Kazooie, and all that stuff for Rare. I had emailed him back in 2010, and I was like, hey, how do I get into the video game industry? How do I do this? And his piece of advice for me was, you got to be a sound designer. That is your foot in the door, is to be a sound designer. So for those that are like, I want to become a video game composer, it's going to be a little difficult unless you establish some sort of rapport with some of these clients, but for most of them, and I've heard countless stories from other people, it's like, I started off as an implementer. I started off as a sound designer, and so for him, he's like, you got to be a sound designer. You got to know Fmod. You got to know Wwise. Like, these are the tools that are going to get you in so that then the audio lead, they could be like, oh, not only do you sound design, but you also write music? Dude, we've got a bunch of stuff we want you to write music for, to like help out with this. And so that's how you get established. There was this guy, I forgot his name. We had done some recordings for Guild Wars 2. And so I was just talking with him, chit-chatting with him. I'm like, how'd you get involved with all this stuff? And he's like, oh, I was actually a sound designer and an implementer for Harmonix, which was the company that did Rock Band, the competitor to Guitar Hero. And so he was already kind of implementing sound design and everything. And somehow he got a sound design job at arena.net with Guild Wars and everything. And then he kind of established himself as the main composer over there, doing all the Guild Wars games and all the expansions and everything. And so I was like, oh, okay, all right, I'm seeing the connections here. And then surprisingly, my own story is like, I came on as a sound designer, with Avalanche. Loved doing all the sound design stuff. It was so much fun, taking all the assets from them to Unreal, plugging them in, playing them and everything. But then Jared's like, hey, we got all this music. Like, do you want to write? Do you want to do music? And I was like, well, I guess. I mean, you hired me as a sound designer, but sure, I'll write some music. And so then there's that. So there's another story to like add to that piece of advice, like get in as a sound designer for games, and then eventually you'll be writing music. So
now the main point, the great, fantastic, and magical.
Oh, perfect! Yes, awesome.
Who doesn't love Harry Potter, right? So now, how did you get involved in this? Following the previous answers, how did you get involved on the game?
Right. So it was a random. I think it was a random call from Peter Murray. He called me up. He was like, "Hey, we're working on this game for Warner Brothers. It's a secret project, whatnot. I can't tell you more than that. But would you like to be a part of it? Like, would you like to come on board for that?" And at the time, I was like, "Sure, yeah, I guess so. I mean, I'm doing pretty well. I've got all these clients that I'm doing projects for. Sure, why not?" And so, he's like, "Okay, cool, sweet. I'll get this all set up and everything. We'll have Jaren call you up. Jaren's the audio lead at Avalanche Software. He calls me up. We just hit it off. Jaren is so awesome. He's fantastic. Just a chill, really relaxed guy. And we just hit it off really well. He's like, "Sweet, awesome. Well, I'll set up another interview, with the whole crew and everything." And so then I got to meet everybody. I got to meet Nate Robbins. I got to meet Rick and Ricky, Scott Turner. I think Scott Turner was there. I'm trying to think, did he come on later? I don't remember. Anyways, the entire sound team of Avalanche Software. They asked me all these questions and everything. And I remember Rick asking me, he's like, "Hey, what's this asterisk on your resume for Wise and whatnot?" I'm like, "Oh, thank goodness somebody asked." I was like, "I'm just be honest with you. I haven't worked with Wise in like 5 years. Like it's been that long, so I'm a little rusty, but I think once I get back into it, everything will come back to me." Like, "Oh, okay." And then Ricky Bradshaw, he asked me, he's like, "All right, so what's your favorite synths to work with?" And I'm like, "Oh, that's right. Okay, I've worked with synths before, doing sound design stuff. It's like I love working with Massive, Native Instruments Massive. I just started diving into Serum. Serum is an incredible, instrument and everything. And so find out that luckily because I had answered those 2 questions, they had hired me on." so they brought me on board, and then I come to find out it's like, oh, it's Hogwarts Legacy. The funny thing is, like, I had no idea what Hogwarts Legacy was even about. I didn't even know about the what do they call those trailers, like the first impression trailers, whatever, introducing the trailer and everything of the game and whatnot. Had no idea that even occurred. I was like, Hogwarts Legacy, what is this? But that was how I was brought on board. And it's lucky because I had Peter Murray, he was my connection, which is kind of crazy because Peter, he was brought on as an intern. I think that was back in 2018. He was brought in as an intern doing dialogue and voiceover stuff. So that was his role, was, taking all these things, fixing them all up, running the voiceover sessions and everything, for all that stuff, and kind of setting up a whole system for all the dialogue in the game. And so luckily, because I had that connection from college and everything, that I was able to get this job. So that's how I got involved with it.
Nice, that's a great story. Also a great example on what you need to learn before that, like why writing this
Right.
game. Could you tell us more about the music team? How big was it? How you like distributed the different responsibilities or different tasks you needed to do in order
Right.
to make the music happen within the game?
Yes. So when I was brought on and started doing music, the first big one that Jared kind of gave me was like, "Hey, we got this Broomfight class mission. It was called Fly 01. That was the mission name." And so I was like, "All right, cool. We'll look at this, see what we can write up and everything." I did a couple of little scores beforehand, kind of like filler music, background exploration music. But this was the kind of the big one where it's like, "All right, let's just go all out." I had listened to what Peter had written, and I had listened to what Chuck had written, and there was something missing. Chuck had written all these amazingly dark, disastrous, eerie kind of scores, to kind of fulfill that role of the game where it's like there's some dark moments in this game, and Chuck was able to write some glorious stuff for that. Peter, he was kind of melding the two together. He was kind of taking some of like the Nicholas Hooper, Patrick O'Doyle, and John Williams kind of stuff, and kind of melding some of that darker stuff that Chuck was writing, and kind of creating that kind of gap. But there was still something missing, and it was just that nostalgic factor, that childlike, awe and wonder that was kind of missing. And Jaron, he told me later on after we had, finished the game and everything, he came up to me and he was like, "Dude, Scott, like there was a couple years ago where I had woken up, in the middle of the night, panicked and freaking out because the music wasn't quite there. He didn't think the music was at the same level as everything else. And so I was like, what? Oh, okay. But anyway, so getting back to the Broomflight class, that was the first big one, which is on the soundtrack called Everybody Grab a Broom. And so that was the first big one where it's like, I'm just going to go all out. We're going to do just nothing but John Williams for this whole thing to make this establish, see how this feels with everybody else. Like, is this what's missing? Is this what we need? And so I did a first draft, and it was okay, it was all right, but it wasn't fitting the scene because I didn't know it was a class. I didn't know it was a class mission. I thought it was just like you're just running around this, kind of more of a what was it called? More of a challenge kind of a scene. So I kind of made it more dark, more urgent and everything. So I was like, okay, let's kind of go that route. But as I played it back, I was like, this is not working out. And so I decided, like, all right, let me come back to this. Let me try something else. And so I decided to come up with this theme, this little idea, and wrote out, 8 minutes of music. It took me about, I think, 2 weeks to write all that music. And then sent that off to Jaron and the whole team. And they were just flabbergasted, like, this is what we need. This is the style. This is what's been missing. And they ran those up the chain, right up the ladder to the higher ups. And the higher ups, the producers and directors are like, we want this for all the missions. Can we do this for all the class missions? Like this style, this everything. And so that's how it kind of started. It's like, all right, let's get ahead. Let's start doing all this stuff. And I think because of that, I've noticed a change in Peter Murray's stuff, especially his stuff. I mean, it was already sounding fantastic, but for some reason, I don't know what happened, but his stuff just started sounding way better. Like he just took it up a notch from that point on. And even Chuck's stuff, even Chuck's music, he took that up a notch as well. So everybody's music just kind of elevated from that moment. I don't know why. Maybe because like we now established like a standard, like a bar, where it's like, okay, this is the standard of like, this is where the music needs to be at. All right, let's bring everything else up. And so we just did that. And so Chuck was doing some awesome stuff. Peter's doing some amazing stuff. I was just writing, whatever needed to be written. And it just turned into this incredible experience. And luckily, we were able to get this all established and finished thanks to our incredible audio producer, Nathan Niobe. He is the best. Without him, we would have never accomplished what we were able to accomplish. Like, he was making sure we were taking care of all our Jira tasks. He was making sure that we were accomplishing all our bugs that we're fixing and everything. As far as the music side of stuff, he was grabbing the actual mission gameplay, sending those off to us, and making sure that we had, the complete thing to go ahead and write all the music for all that. Like, without him, the whole thing would have crashed, So I just got to give huge props to Nathan, because without him, it would not have been possible without our producer. So he helped out so much. And like him and Peter, like they were helping, implementing and everything. And Peter, I got to give huge props to Peter, because he not only was he composing, but he was also implementing a lot of this music and creating all these playlists and everything that would play. Like I was implementing stuff for my missions in particular, so I would go ahead, double check all that stuff. But as time came through, we're getting closer to the deadline, I couldn't implement as quickly as possible. So I was like just writing as much music. We sent it off to the game designers to implement and make sure those all got in properly. But Peter, he was, for a single guy, just like making sure everything was working musically wise, integrated in everything. Like that was he deserves like a raise and a half, or at least a promotion or two or something. Like it was unbelievable how he was able to pull that off. He just did an awesome job. So that was kind of how our music team kind of worked. We would send off stuff. We had a whole Slack channel, and so we sent off reviews. I would send off the music with the picture to make sure everything's working properly. And Peter told me, like from a business perspective, everything that I sent off, it was a first draft, but it was also a final draft and a final mix. Like whatever you hear on the soundtrack, it was all a first draft. Albeit the Broomflight one, that one was a little bit, I had a couple of revisions to figure out for that one. and the Slytherin Common Room. That one I had done an original, I'd done a piece for that originally, but we decided to repurpose that and make that into the Greenhouse music. And then I did the Slytherin Common Room because I was like, oh, let's try something else. And thank goodness Peter had come up with the idea of like, let's do like a mazurka, like a Chopin mazurka. So I was like, oh, let's dive into like Chopin, Debussy, Ravel. And so I had written a whole separate piece for Slytherin from those references. But yeah, that's generally how it kind of worked. We'd bounce ideas off of each other, double check our work, make sure everything's working. But for the most part, everything that I wrote was kind of a first draft and a final mix. And then on top of that, we would do a version with the melody and one without the melody, just to give it some longevity, give it some legs to go a little bit longer. So you weren't just hearing the same thing over and over and over again. So that's how we kind of approached that. So
Nice. So all the music implementation was by using Wise, right?
yeah, that was all done with Wise. Yep.
Nice. And all the composers were implementing, or just
No,
you?
no. Me and Peter, I implemented a lot of stuff for my mission classes. Peter implemented like everything else, which is way more than anything I could do. Chuck, he would write with Chuck. The way he wrote was he would do like 12-minute long songs that was all kind of synced to picture. But of course, as video games, it's not just linear, right? So it's adaptive music. So so Peter would have to go ahead and edit all this stuff, make sure that you have these swells going in, have all these triggers, have these stingers that would occur. Man, Pete, golly day, he's a machine and a half. He's incredible at that. So
Well, that leads to the next question, but because I was wondering how is the adaptive music working on the game? I couldn't play the game yet, so
oh, okay.
how does the system work? How did you come up with it?
Oh, so yeah. So Peter and I, we were kind of going through and figuring out what would be the best approach to make sure that everything, all the music would be triggered and everything. So for me, I would go ahead and do, I would write it all out linearly, but there would be specific moments that I would make sure like, okay, this is where it's going to cut and loop back to the beginning. Then we'll have a transitional part, if it transitions in the scene, we'll have a transitional part that would happen. And that would be, a transition stinger. And then you go to your next section and we'll have to figure out how to, you write this song and modulates like 5 times. How can we have this loop back to the beginning? And then also be able to transition again to the next section. So it was almost kind of like linear writing, for film scoring or commercials or game or for TV shows. But it all depends on, when the character triggers these specific moments. Either it's triggered by a dialogue, it's triggered by a cutscene. And so we would have to essentially kind of just write a whole cue sheet, like M1, M2, M3, M4, M5, M6, all the way down to like M20 or something of all these little triggers that would happen. And then we would figure out transitional states that would occur. And so you create all these different states, within Wise to make sure like, if this happens, then this happens, right? And so we would have to figure that all out, map it all out. We'd have all these documents, of like, okay, here's this point. We need to have this triggered by this blueprint from this, from this section in Unreal, and make sure this all works properly. And then we would test it out in Wise, make sure everything's working properly in Wise as it's triggered. And sometimes what we have written sometimes wouldn't work. Sometimes it was just, this is not working properly. Like there was one part from the Defense Against the Dark Arts class. There's this, once you defeated Sebastian, at the dueling of the wands, he loses everything and it's supposed to cut into a cutscene. Well, the copy of the video that I had, the cutscene didn't take, it took a little while to get to the cutscene to get triggered. And so I had this long music section that would kind of happen before the cutscene happened. But then we found out that, we're doing a Dueling of the Wands kind of side quest, with all the students and everything. And so I was like, I'm going to change my music then. I'm going to cut out that big chunk that was just this huge tail end of this piece. We're going to just truncate that, make it really shorter. So it's just immediate, done, whatever, go into the conversation. So there'd be little things like that would be editing, changing up, adjusting to make it fit. And so with the way that this team kind of works, it was kind of all kind of chaotic creativity. That's what Peter and I have kind of decided. It was just chaos, but somehow there was like some form to this chaos that we're able to be creative and, try out all these different ideas. And sometimes we have to scrap a bunch of it. but sometimes we're able to retain some of that stuff. Maybe just have to change up a little bit. And so that's for the entire development. That's kind of how it felt. So with for this music integration stuff, this adaptive system, we'd be trying these ideas out. Be like, is this working? Is this not? Like, is this transition? Like, do we want this to happen here? Do we want to change this so it's its own separate thing and in a separate event altogether? So we would just figure this stuff out and kind of see what works and what didn't. So.
Okay, nice. So, how long did it take for you since you got into the project until the everything was finished and approved?
Right. So if we're gonna be doing just the music thing, that would have been probably end of March, beginning of April when I started actually like going full-time music all the way up until about January 15th. That's when I had put my pencil down, stopped. The last song I wrote was the pause menu music. And that took like 2 hours to write. But yeah, so from April to about the middle of January, that was my time doing music for the game.
Okay, so it was like kind of 9 months.
Give or
But
take, yeah.
oh yeah, they were like making music before that. So counting that, how long it's the total?
The total development.
Yeah.
I want to say, I think Chuck, he was the first one because Chuck has been with Avalanche like as a contractor with all the Disney Infinity games and everything beforehand. I think he was brought on, I want to say 2017. I think that's when they started doing like the R&D phase, concept art, concept music and everything. Started doing all that around that time. And then Peter came in and then he was starting to write some music in 2018, 2019. They had, gotten a bunch of stuff done 2020. And then 2021, it wasn't until the tail end of 2021 where they hired me on. And then I guess apparently they had a bunch of stuff. They just needed stuff. And so from April until January 15th, it was just nonstop music for all these classes, for all these exploration themes. Yeah, it was kind of wild and wacky. So everything all kind of happened and was all brought together at the very, like the last year of development. So I guess, yeah, so probably, what would that be, like 6 years, give or take? So.
Okay. You were talking about a little bit how you have an approach with the John Williams styles of music for the game. So the question is, how was first of all your experience working with the John Williams style? Because I mean that's a huge responsibility, right? Uh, and how much freedom did you have to like using the material of the original films, and how close were you requested to be with the original materials on the films, or how far did you get the chance to get in terms of, I don't know, using your own voice maybe?
Right. So with as far as doing the style of John Williams and everything, I had dabbled in it a little bit way back in the day, but the thing is like you're working with virtual instruments, and so there's that limitation. Back, I was working with East West Quantum Leap stuff, and so that just I couldn't really pull it off. It wasn't at the level as Thomas Bergerson was or is, where he was able to make all these incredible things with those libraries. But I'll still try to figure it out and everything. It actually wasn't until. And once again, another project with Devin Graham, Devin Supertramp. It was the Lara Croft, Indiana Jones, Nathan Drake crossover video that we had done. And I want to say that was like, when was that? 2020? Or was that 2020? Maybe that was 2021 that I did that. And that I was, that's where I really dove into like, let's make this an actual John Williams like score, for this little video, for Devin Graham. Let's figure out how to do that. How can I make this work with virtual instruments? And so that kind of established like, oh, I can make this work. We can definitely make this doable. And so with Hogwarts Legacy, that's kind of what I stuck to. I was like, I'm going to stick to just the first three films, exhaust all the material, all the references that I can think of, all the little idioms, all the little harmonic and melodic structures that he's doing, everything in those scores. And I'm going to write music in that style, with all the fun flourishes and everything. And so that's what I did. But then eventually I was like, you know what? I'm going to dig a little further back. I want to see, his entire discography. I want to listen to all of it. And I want to see what gems, what little hidden little trinkets I could find that still work in the world of Hogwarts Legacy, in the world of Harry Potter. Because that was the only thing that Jaren and Marcus, the two audio leads, they're like, as long as it's in the realm of Hogwarts or in the realm of Harry Potter, perfect. Let's focus on just that. If it's on property, that's what they would say. And it's like, sweet, awesome. All right. So I'm just going to go through the entire discography of John Williams and see what can I find? What are some cool stuff, that he had written way back in the day. And so I was discovering all these amazing scores that nobody has really heard of, or movies that nobody has really seen. There's one in particular. There's The Accidental Tourist. There's a particular song in there that I just absolutely love, that I was so drawn to for a lot of the little missions, just because it's so happy and peppy and so just fun. But I had this really beautiful melody. There is The Fury. That was another example, another song in there that was just really cool. And I love the little harmonic ideas that he was doing. I was like, okay, how can I implement these little ideas into my own scores? And then of course we're going on to more contemporary stuff, like, the Minority Report, War of the Worlds, AI, all these kind of newerish videos, or movies, kind of picking out little ideas that he was doing. And I would start implementing those into my own scores. And so I start figuring out all these cool ideas that he was doing. And I'm like, oh, I want to try that out. How can I do that with virtual instruments? And that was always the struggle. It's like, how can I make that with virtual instruments? And so I'm just going to tell you, all the music that's on the soundtrack is all virtual. All my music is all virtual. I'm using Cinematic Studio String, Cinematic Studio Brass, Cinematic Studio Woodwinds. We're using the Cineperks from Cinesamples. And so that's all just virtual instruments. And the reason for that is we just didn't have time to record an actual orchestra. Chuck, his entire house is like a recording studio, so he was able to bring in live players for some of his stuff. But Peter and I, we were kind of just working with virtual instruments. And so it's like, all right, let's make this sound as realistic as possible. Hence, from my beginning of this is what I need to do to get to this point. Make my stuff sound realistic as possible so that when I get to this point, I can accomplish that. And so surprisingly, a lot of composers that I've talked to or interviewed with, they were surprised and flabbergasted, wait, this is all virtual instruments? I'm like, yeah. So that's, yeah, it's kind of insane to think that's how far technology has gotten us, where virtual instruments are getting so good and so beautiful sounding. But at the same time, these string libraries, brass libraries, woodwind libraries, they're still played by real people. There are real people behind those recordings. We're just taking those little samples, those little bits, and kind of piecing them all together. But anyway, so that was how I was able to kind of accomplish that, was kind of listening to a bunch of John Williams music, seeing how can I pull this off with virtual instruments. And 90% of the time, if not 100% of the time, nobody could tell that it was a fake, a fake library, a fake orchestra. So that's how we were able to pull that off. Now, as far as working with, being close to the original content of John Williams stuff versus, doing our own things, there was some little hiccups there. I remember specifically with Hedwig's theme. We had talked with the John Williams estate, talking with the attorneys and everything. And even to this day, I'm still kind of confused. I know we had permission to use it for one particular part of the game. It's the entire, once you had finished up the first 40 minutes of the intro, then eventually it goes to the trees, you swoop down, the owl flies by, the Hogwarts Express goes by, you go through the clearing and everything, and then the Hogwarts castle is revealed. across the lake. And that was the one time that we could really feature Hedwig's themes and kind of do our own take on it. So we had permission to do that. It wasn't until later on when it came to doing the cinematic trailer that I wrote the music for, with the owl and everything and the whole flight and all that, where the estate decided to kind of change it up a little bit. Like, no, you can't use Hedwig's themes anymore. We're changing that up, so you don't have permission to do that. And we're like, oh, okay, that's kind of weird. It was either you had to use the actual recording of the music or don't use it at all. And so I was like, all right, cool. We will just use our own theme. We'll use our own, Hogwarts Legacy Ancient Magic theme that Chuck wrote. We'll use that. And then whatever else, and do an entire trailer on that. And then surprisingly, at the very end of that trailer, they decided to throw in Hedwig's theme at the end. I'm like, thank goodness they decided, like, let's just throw it in there and make it work. Because that's what the fans want, and that's what they need, So I'm glad they made that decision. But we were kind of restricted on, can we use Hedwig's theme at all? I remember particularly, we had to kind of go through all our music to see if there was any references to Hedwig's theme. Whether it was intentional or unintentional, and whether it was like a counter melody to something that, to the melody or whatnot. If I don't know, I'm trying to remember why we did that. And I think it was because we weren't quite sure if we could use Hedwig's theme or not. So we decided to play it safe and not use Hedwig's theme in any of our music. So that was the one little weird thing about, working with, the John Williams estate, and like, can we use these themes that he's already established? So that's why we kind of started doing our own music, started adapting and doing our own stuff. I know Chuck and I know Peter, they had, adapted some ideas from the later composers like Patrick O'Doyle, Nicholas Hooper and everything, into their own scores. I think they even did some of the James Newton Howard stuff from Fantastic Beast. I decided to not do any of that stuff. I decided just to kind of do more of what John Williams has done in the past and implement those ideas into my own stuff, because I just wanted to just write like John Williams. I just wanted to do that style. So that's kind of how we approach that. So
nice. So, do you have any other source of inspirations for music besides John Williams?
Oh, sure, yeah. Yes. I remember specifically with Everybody Grab a Broom. There was some. There's some. I'm trying to remember. Was it Adams? Is it Adam Smith? That doesn't sound. John Adams. That's his name. Like, not Adam Smith. John Adams. He's a contemporary composer. He did this awesome song called like A Short Ride in a Fast Machine. Just this awesome, cool piece. It's kind of similar to like a Philip Glass kind of orchestration. Very minimalism, but like really bombastic. Just all these cool harmonies that were going on. And so that was an inspiration for Everybody Grab a Broom. In addition to that, there was a score from Michael Kamen from the Iron Giant. He had written some beautiful music from that soundtrack. I was like, oh, these are really cool. I love the mood and the style that's going on here. Let's see if I can implement some of these ideas into my own music. And so there's some moments in some of the some of the cutscenes where I kind of do that. James Newton Howard, a lot of his Mickey Mousing stuff, from Treasure Planet, from Looney Tunes with Space Jam. There's some really cool Mickey Mousey stuff that he had done. So I was like, oh, I'm gonna see if I can figure out this kind of stuff, see what he's doing here, and see if I can, kind of do something similar to that in my own style. So there's a couple of cutscenes doing that. And then of course with the Vivariums, that one I said, like, you know what? I'm just gonna do my own style. I'm gonna do my own kind of, what can we do to differentiate from John Williams and that soundtrack to something more tranquil and calm and serene. And of course, the one composer that fits that description is Thomas Newman. And so I remember listening to all his soundtracks, but there was one in particular that really stuck out to me for just the colors and the instrumentations that he was using. And it was the soundtrack called He Named Me Malala. And there was a couple of songs in there that just really spoke to me as I put this music to the the videos of the vivarium, the forest vivarium, the coastal vivarium, and I'm like, dude, this is like so perfect. Like this is so beautiful. I'm gonna do this because I was already familiar with the way that Thomas Newman writes, and so I was like, all right, I can knock this out easily. So for the coastal vivarium, that was done during the week between Christmas and New Year's. I think it was like done in like 2 days or something like that. I was like, I'm just gonna write this, use a Duke, put in some crystal flutes. We'll have these beautiful, Sordino strings that are going on here. And as for the forest vivarium, the first vivarium that you open up, I decided like, all right, we're going to implement some James Newton Howard kind of stuff at the beginning, but we're also going to take like an Aaron Copland kind of vibe, kind of like this Americana kind of approach, with this transition, and then it'll sway into this tranquil, serene Thomas Newman kind of soundscape. And so those are the other influences that kind of shaped the music for the soundtrack. So
Nice. Great spices for the music.
yeah, right.
Great recipe. Talking about, you talked about a little bit of the recording with live musicians. I thought you had recorded all the music with, because of the videos.
Right, right.
I'm amazed that you have most of the music just with virtual instruments and sounds amazing. So that's great work. I want to know a little bit more about how was all the process recording with musicians, and how was the process of choosing what musician to record with. I don't know, all you want to talk about.
Whew, man. Boy, I wish I could say more about that, but there's only one song that I had a musician, and it was actually Peter. It was the Potions class music. And so I had sent it off, for the Potions class, and everybody loved it. But Peter's a flautist. He's an awesome flautist. And so he's like, hey Scott, let me take a stab at this. Let me do the flute part for you. Because I had some flutter tongue kind of stuff happening with the flute. And so I had him just record it, in his own space, his own studio and everything. I put it in, mix it, put on the reverb, all that fun stuff. And that was the only actual live musician of all the tracks that I did. Which is kind of funny because Nathan Iobi, he went out to GDC this past year, or this year, and he met with Gareth Coker. And Gareth Coker, he specifically mentioned that one little part. He's like, oh, I can tell that's a real flute player on that one song. So I was like, all right, cool, awesome. As far as Chuck, I don't know how Chuck approached it. But I know I've worked with all the musicians that Chuck has worked with, all the cellist players, violin players, choirs and everything. So I've worked with all these people when I was working at huge studios. So I know them all very, very well. And so he would bring in these particular people like Nicole Pinnell, a phenomenal, incredible cello player here in Utah, like if not the go-to cello player in all of Utah to record. And so he would bring her in, and she would just do an awesome job writing, playing all this amazing music that you hear in the game. So any kind of cello stuff that's live is Nicole. Like Nicole is the best at that. As for the choirs, I know Chuck had hired in specific choir groups for some of the songs of his. And so he would hire the BYU Men's Chorus. The BYU's Men's Chorus is a phenomenal group throughout all of Utah. And they're just phenomenal I was part of the BYU's Men's Chorus when I was at college. I didn't care for it because I was like, just get me out of college. I'm done. It was my last semester. I was like, get me out of here. But they're a phenomenal group to record. And so he would hire them, bring them on board, record all these amazing choir stuff for his music. And so, he's got his whole space from the videos and everything. Like it's a pretty large space to put in a whole choir and record them all. And then I remember he had brought on someone specifically for all the lute playing that happens in the game. Like there's this particular painting that you walk up and there's a lute player playing. And so he had hired a guitarist to come in and record all that stuff. So you have that authentic, recording all that stuff. So I don't remember his name. I think he was, I'm trying to think, was he natively from like Ireland or Scotland or something like that? I forgot. anyway, a phenomenal, Lutis, that Chuck just hired in to help out. So if anything, Chuck would be way better at answering all this stuff than I would be, because he used live players for most of his stuff. So
Yeah. Well, but it's great to know how was this process and amazing. Uh, uh, um, sorry, I'm being amazed again of knowing that most of it is virtual instruments because I remember seeing those videos recording with a small orchestra ensemble
yep,
or something.
yep.
You know something about? I mean, can you tell us something about it?
Yeah, because we're all part of that. That was just that was for PR. That's just for just to kind of advertise, market, like, hey, we got live players. And for the most part, yes, for a lot of Chuck stuff, Chuck's music's got live players for most of it. But for mine and Pete, like, none of it. So for that whole thing, it was kind of like smoke and mirrors, it was kind of like, yeah, like we've got, live players, but, so we're just going to kind of like, do this whole, confuse you, I guess, in a way. Like, yes, we had used live players, but sometimes some of the tracks you might pick up, be like, oh, it doesn't sound like a live player, And surprisingly, I remember specifically these two amazing composers, Blake Robinson and Daniel Behom. If anything, I think they are the top guys as far as virtual instruments goes, like making their stuff sound as realistic as possible. And even they were kind of confused, like, oh, is this real? Is this fake? Like, I can kind of hear that it's fake, but I also can, like, we've got real players. Like, what's going on here? Like, even they were kind of confused. But no, that whole thing was just for publicity. It was just, yeah, it's just kind of showcasing. A lot of the musicians that are showcased in there actually are on the soundtrack. Like, they're actual, recorded on the soundtrack. So yeah, so there's some half truths, I guess, to that. So.
Very
But
nice.
yeah, that's pretty much how it was.
Absolutely. So, for writing this music and making it sound as great as it is with virtual instruments, did you have to think all the orchestrations or the kind of arrangements for the virtual instruments, or you just think of it like a music for actual musicians, and then after that, thinking how to make it sound like a real like playing?
Yeah. So generally how I would do it is I would go ahead and do it in kind of 4 to 8 measure chunks. Now I would just do a piano score. That's usually what I do. I just write it all out on the piano, within 4 to 8 measures, kind of get an idea down. And then I would take that whole thing and I do a vertical orchestration. I take all of it, spread it all out, and I would make sure that it would fit into an actual orchestra. We're not synthesizing a hybrid orchestra where we have like, 80 string players and like 20 French horn players, It's like, all right, we're going to stick to, if I've got 40 string players, that's what I'm going to work with. I've got X amount of players for violins 1 and 2, for viola, cello, and bass. Okay, we're going to just stick to that. If we're going to do the Visi stuff, okay, we're going to have to divide that out, and make sure that all sounds realistic and everything. Same with brass. So like I only had 4 French horns, 3 trumpets, 2 trombones, 1 bass trombone, and 1 tuba to work with. And so I would write all my music to fit with that, that group. And as far as flute players, everything was doubled. So you had 2 flutes, 2 clarinets, 2 bassoonists, 1 bass clarinet, and 2 oboists that would switch out from, English horn to oboe. And then, of course, and one of the flute players would switch out to a piccolo for those higher parts. And so I would make sure everything was still fit into the realm of what a real orchestra would play. And I think that what carries across, what makes it sound realistic, as opposed to being like just bombastic, just this huge wall of sound, because you have like this Wagner, size orchestra of like 180, players and everything. I decided to stick it to like what you would actually find in a real orchestra setting. And so that's what I stuck to. And of course, with the string players, to get more realism, more clarity, I would double that with the solo strings. So the solo strings from Cinematic Studio Strings, and then the ensemble strings from Cinematic Studio Series. So I double those together to kind of make it sound more authentic, because most of the times you have a spot mic on the first player, the first chair of the violin group. And so you gotta have more of that rosin, more of that clarity and everything, to make that sound realistic. Of course, And luckily, Cinematic Studios stuff, they already have everything auto pan to their proper locations and places. But sometimes I might tweak that a little bit. But for the most part, kind of just set them, how they are. And just put them in the space, with a reverb, and then call it a day. And that's generally how it would work.
Nice.
Yeah.
It worked perfectly because it sounds great. So,
Yeah. So I would. Oh, that's right. It's like. So that was all the vertical writing, and then I would just do that for all the initial parts, like do it all in 4 to 8 measures, because I realized with John Williams music, it's so dense. There's so much stuff happening. He's got all these little colors, all these little flourishes that are happening, and so I would have to do it all in 4 measured chunks just to make sure I'm covering all that stuff. And then I just keep doing that for 2.5, 3, 5, 7, 8 minutes long to make sure everything is working properly. Make sure we're not repeating stuff, where it's not being boring with ostinatos, and make sure that's engaging not only for the listener but also thinking of how would this be engaging for the musician. So that was the other perspective I was thinking of. Like, all right, we've got this flute player that's playing here. It doesn't have a really big part till later on in this score, but let's have him do all this really cool, fun flourish stuff throughout. And so that was one of the examples I had done with the piece, The Escape, which is when you fly off with a high wing, the hippogriff. Where it's like, all right, we got this flute stuff doing cool stuff here, flute stuff doing cool stuff there, but there's this big chunk of like, what could this flute player be doing to like do all these fun little ideas throughout to kind of give it momentum, give it some excitement. And that's just one of the things of, listening to John Williams stuff. He's always got something happening. Like, I had just listened to the Hook soundtrack, on my stroll with my kiddo. Holy macaroni. Like, if there's ever a score that is just so dense with so much stuff happening with the orchestra, that is a soundtrack everyone has to listen to, because it's insane how, like, I feel sorry for the orchestrator that had to orchestrate all that stuff because it is so much music. It's just so dense. So I just wanted to implement that same style and everything into my own score. How do we do that? So I just truncated out into just 4 to 8 measure bars, and that made it possible so I didn't go insane. So
okay. So that leads to 2 questions about it.
Yeah.
How long did it take you to write 1 minute of music? And if you, when we're writing music on the DAW, you were using like a sheet music, or for writing your part and I don't know, leading your readings and arrangements on the orchestra, or just the DAW?
So the first question, wait, what was the first question again?
How long did it take to you?
How long did it take? That's right. Okay. So for writing just one single music in the style of John Williams, it would take anywhere from, depending on how much action is happening, how much music is needed, it would range to about, on average, about 4 hours. It would take me about that much to do 1 minute of music. There'd be some days, however, where I'm figuring out a transition. I've written this beautiful 3-minute long score, but I have a transition back so it loops and make sure everything works seamlessly. But also, this transition has to work so that it goes into the next section of music. And sometimes those transitions would take me 8 hours, if not a day or two, to figure out how can I make this modulate and work and come back to the original, and make sure it all sounds like John Williams, because it's not going to be easy. John Williams doesn't make music easy. He does it so intricately, so well thought out, but it's so complex at the same time, of going from one part to this other part in this crazy roadmap to get there. And so I would spend like a day or two trying to figure out it'd be like 2 measures. That's all it'd be, like 2 measures or 3 or 4 measures. Like, how do I make this work? How do I get there? But for the most part, generally it would be about 4 hours to do 1 minute. And so sometimes, depending on the style of the music and everything, how easy, it comes together creatively, doing 10 minutes of music would be done in a single week. So that'd be like 10 minutes would be kind of the class mission that'd be done in a single week. They just send off, implement, make sure it's all in there, and be checked in and be finalized. So yeah. And then as for
that minute, would be like a finished track, or you have to mix it, master it, or just completely finished.
Oh, I'm the thing is like I'm mixing everything as I'm composing it. So I'm doing all the volume automation, everything. The weird thing is, I as far as like orchestral stuff, like I rarely have to touch the volume knob to like do any kind of volume automation. Most of the time, it's done within the mod wheel, the expressions, the vibratos, all the additional articulations, right? And so I would be controlling all of those parameters and hardly ever needing to deal with the volume knob at all. And so I would be mixing all this stuff in real time. So that 4 measures that I talked about previously, like when I write it all out, I'm making sure that is a final version before I move on to the next part. Just to make sure that is sounding perfect and exactly how I want it before I move on. And so that might take a little bit longer, but I think the end result is, I don't know, way better. So,
Yeah, absolutely.
so yeah.
Using your equalizations and
Yeah, all that stuff's already it's all pre in there. Surprisingly, a lot of the coloring and a lot of like the dynamic control is happening on the master bus. I've got my EQ, right, and I've got a compressor, catching those additional transients. But then it's my dynamic EQ that's really handling a lot of the stuff, the multi-brand multipressor, that's really handling a lot of the work. As far as the bombastic booms, the shrilling highs and all that stuff, really controlling all that stuff. And then I'll do, a limiter. I rarely, for orchestral stuff, I'll never do a serial limiting technique. I only do that for trailer stuff. But I'll just have one limiter to kind of just catch any more additional transients. But for the most part, that multi-band compressor is doing all the work to make it sound the way it is. So,
cool, nice.
yeah.
So the other question was if you were using sheet music while you
Oh,
compose.
yes. So for me, it's all done with Logic. So everything's done in Logic. I didn't do any sheet music. That just takes way too much time for me. Where I could just go ahead, play it out, do it all in Logic and everything. Press Shift R because it's record captured. All my MIDI stuff shows up right there. I can take those little ideas, tweak them a little bit, throw them into the orchestra, and call it a day. I hear people, they're like, no, you got to do sheet music. That's the proper way to do it. And I'm like, well, there's technology. Like, we've got all this technology to make us be more efficient, to write faster, to get our ideas down quicker and faster. So why not do that? So all the stuff's all written in Logic. That's my main DAW. And yeah, so that's what I did. So
Hey, awesome. So we're getting to the final questions on this interview. That is, I'm enjoying a lot of this, learning a lot, and amazing, being amazed again about.
Stop it, Ariel.
Yeah.
Whatever.
Yeah, man, I've been watching a lot of gameplays on the game. I know, realizing that it's all virtual instruments, like, dude, this is sounding just fantastic. I want to learn how to do that now. I need to get to that level. I cannot work less than that now.
Oh, okay, all right.
I have a new challenge now. Thanks. Thanks to you. So, here's one interesting question for
Yeah.
me. What's your favorite piece of your own that you wrote for this game, and what was the most challenging piece?
All right, favorite piece. Oh man, this one is really tough to narrow down because I really loved all the songs that I wrote because they're all just so personable and I just pour so much love and passion into each of these scores. Just because like these are the kinds of songs that I would love to hear, back when I was a kid, from the 90s and everything. But I think in particular there's 2 songs that I absolutely love. And that's Soaring Over Hogwarts. And the second one is the Christmas song that happens in only the Christmas season of Hogwarts Legacy. As far as Soaring Over Hogwarts, for some reason, man, it's just that simple little melody that really opened up like this whole like childlike thing that I always wanted to accomplish. I mean, listening to John Williams stuff, like it's always the really simple themes that really tug on your heartstrings, that really yearn back to the good old days, like, oh, the first time hearing and watching Jurassic Park, first time watching E.T. and listening to that soundtrack. And so I wanted to do something like that. And so Soaring Over Hogwarts, this is you as a gamer. Your first time hopping on your broom, flying across this majestic land of Hogwarts, Scotland, and just taking in all the scenery and everything. And so I wanted to be like, how can I do that in a musical form? And so that's essentially what I did. I just created this little melody. I was probably taking a shower or driving in my car or something, whatever. It's weird like how these melodies come about. It's always at the most randomest time, you know. And so that's probably when it occurred, where it's like, I love this melody. I'm gonna go ahead, take my phone, put up, bring up the voice memo thing, hum into that. Like, this is the melody I want to do, and I'll bring it into my session and write it all out. And the funny thing was is that Peter had recommended like, oh, let's do like because we had put in some placement music, just some filler music for the time being. And at the time for the hippogriff flight stuff, like anytime you hop on your hippogriff and fly around, it was the Fox the Phoenix theme. That was the song that would play. And so that was a little bit of the inspiration to kind of get things going. Like, okay, I see what he's doing here. He's got this momentum going on, making all this motion, this momentum, pushing this forward to where you then get this beautiful, like bombastic theme that comes in. And so I wanted to kind of do the exact same thing with my own score, because I was like, okay, let's have this beautiful entry and everything, and then we introduced the theme on the piano. It's like ba da ba da bum ba da ba da bum ba da ba da ba da bum bum, and then it's like, okay, let's push that all the way through, until you get the full effect with the entire orchestra and everything, like this huge release and everything. And it just, I don't know, listening or reading through all the comments and everything, people when that hit them, they just would swell up with tears, because it would bring them back to their childhood, watching the first couple of movies, anything that just reminded them of like the first time feeling that flight music, something of flight, whether it be Hook, whether it be E.T., or anything else. And so that's how that kind of came about. The second piece that I actually love was the Christmas song, which isn't on the album, unfortunately, just because we had finished up the entire album, sent it off for mastering and everything, and then I had just written that piece. And that one, I always had wanted to do a Christmas song. The moment I saw Hogwarts all decked out in Christmas decor and everything, it's like, I gotta do a Christmas song. Like, we have to have a Christmas song. Like John Williams, he's got a Christmas song, from the first movie, and then of course all the other scores that he's done that has like Christmas themes, like Home Alone and whatnot. Like, they're always just so memorable. They're just so fun and so cheerful and everything. And once again, it just came down to like a simple little melody and everything. And I was like, this is the melody. This is what I want to do. And then just wrote out this entire Christmas kind of score to kind of match the setting and everything. And so I love those two so much. I mean, all the other ones I love as well, but those two take the top. And as far as the most challenging one is the Slytherin Common Room. That was probably the most difficult one to nail down. Because there's this kind of negative connotation with the Slytherin group, like, oh, they practice the dark arts, they're evil and everything and whatnot. And so there's always that connection of like, they're dark, they're not good people and everything. But I'm like, but it's an entire group of class. Like, you got your Gryffindor, you got your Ravenclaw, you got your what's the other group called? Hufflepuff, and then Slytherin. Like, they're all part of this school, so they can't be bad. And so that was the most difficult one to figure out. Like, how do I figure out this group of students? Like, they're not bad. They're good. They're loyal. They're loyal. They're pure bloods. So there's like this higher classmanship, I guess. And so when Peter had recommended the Chopin's Mazurkas, that started kind of getting the ball going of like, oh, what if instead we envision the Slytherin as kind of like this high class aristocrats, these upper class people, And so that kind of gave me ideas of like, oh, these, in the 1800s, they would hire, like Chopin, Rachmaninoff, Beethoven to come to their parties to perform and play and everything. And so it's like, what if we do something like that? And so I just, started diving into all of Rachmaninoff stuff, all of Chopin stuff, Debussy, Ravel, all these amazing scores and everything, and started kind of figuring out like, oh, these are the cool little accidentals that are happening in the piano. These are the kind of the chords that are happening. And like, I love Impressionist music. So like I drew heavily from Debussy and Ravel, as opposed to Chopin and Rachmaninoff. And so I figured out this whole intro part. I'm like, cool, I like that. Now let's just make this just piano for this first part. Let's just do piano only and kind of establish this theme, and then we'll bring on the strings. We'll start doing these really nice, like calm, warm chords for the strings, and then the piano starts doing its own little thing, be more classical bass. And so that's what kind of established the Slytherin Common Room, was classy people.
Yeah, what a challenge.
Yeah.
It was a great story.
And so I was, and then of course, once I got that all taken care of, the funny thing is like I knew immediately this song was going to be a hit. Like I loved it so much. And I was like, I know this one's going to be really popular with the fans. And so looking through like the Spotify playlist and everything, we had the overture of the Unwritten, that's the top one, and it's like Slytherin Common Room and the Coastal Bavarian, like those are the top two after that. So I was like, I knew this is gonna be good. I knew people are gonna like this one. They're gonna gravitate to this one a lot. So
well, great story. And I mean, who wouldn't like to make all of this experience you did? With John Williams music and Harry Potter's story. So we have one last question.
Oh, perfect.
Let you go.
Sweet. Okay.
Is there any music that you would love to have reading for any part of the game or for the Harry Potter franchise that you couldn't, but would have liked to?
Oh, boy. Yes, there is. There's one in particular. We were going to do it, but we just ran out of time. It was doing Christmas music for all of Hogsmeade, because even Hogsmeade goes into Christmas decor and everything when that season appears. And I had a whole idea. I had a whole thing figured out that I wanted to write for Hogsmeade, but we just ran out of time. And I was like, that's the one thing, because if there's anything that feels like Christmas, it's like Hogsmeade. Like if you're walking through Hogsmeade, like this hamlet and everything, like Hogsmeade decked out in Christmas decor, like that is what I think Christmas is. Like it's just this cute, quaint, beautiful town and everything, all decked out with all this, the trees and everything and all the decoration and everything. To me, that's Christmas. And I was like, I wish I had more time to just write a Christmas song just for Hogsmeade. So there's that. And I'm trying to think of any other particular parts. Oh, that's right. The Room of Requirements. That's the one where I just didn't know, but so I had written the Room of Requirements. We sent it off. The higher ups loved it and everything, so we kept it in there. But the only thing is I didn't know that you could change the ambiance of the Room of Requirements. So the video that I had was all like warm tone, light and like, kind of, colorful and everything. Kind of more of a woodsy kind of vibe. So it's very, upbeat and everything. So I was like, oh, that fits that theme, that Room of Requirements song. But as the game came out and as when I started playing it and, reading through comments from Reddit and everything, I didn't know that you could change the ambiance of the entire Room of Requirements so that it could be like castle, like very dark, moody kind of stuff. And that's the one thing is like, I wish I had known that was possible, because I would have written 3 additional music for the Room of Requirements. So every time you change it, it would be a different song to match the settings and everything for the players. So it's just one of those things where it's like, we kind of just ran out of time. And I just didn't know. So that was the other thing where it's like, I wish I'd written more music just for that. and establish it. And I remember Peter telling me, because when I sent out that first draft, that is the final version in the soundtrack. He's like, "Oh, this is fun and everything, but it might be a little too much for the players." And so I was like, "Oh, I'll just do another rewrite, you know." But the higher ups had already been like, "Oh, this works perfectly. Let's throw it in. Let's keep it." And so everybody else was happy, and so I'm like, "All right, then we're happy." But I was like, "Ah, man, just wish I had known, because I would have written more music for that." So,
Yeah.
so maybe the next game, who knows? So,
Absolutely.
right.
This one is going great, so who knows? Right?
Who knows, right? So,
Yeah, I see all advertising on TV here. Almost like every time I see something, I watch something on TV. So
yeah, right.
yeah. Well, so final question that I'm interested in, final thoughts. I will ask you some advice or final words that you would like to share with aspiring composers. Thinking not only aspiring composers that might be in a context similar to you, like in the States or Canada or maybe London, I don't know, but also for composers from different backgrounds, like Latin American composers.
Right.
What are like tips, tricks, or cheats that you can say for a career?
Yeah. So one of the things that I have noticed is in this, there's no set path to success as a composer. You know, I look at all of my mentors; their paths are completely different from my path, and of course, there's different paths for everybody else. There's no set way. So you, as yourself, you have to be determined. You've got to be diligent on, you know, is this what you want to do for a living? I have known that I've wanted to do this since the age of 12. So it's always been burned in me, like, I want to do this for a living. I can't think of doing anything else than this. And so that's been kind of my, you know, my momentum is keeping me going. It's like, I want to do this for a living. So for aspiring composers, like, do you have that desire, that burning passion to make this a career, to make this a dream? And then for that is, you have to really connect. You got to network. Luckily with school, like, that is a great place. I know people always ask me, like, well, is school worth it? Like, is it worth to go to school, you know, go into debt, to, you know, for music and everything? And it depends. It depends on what you get out of your education. For me, it was networking. Like, if anything, with Berklee, with USC, you know, Thornton School of Music, with Columbia and everything, it's all about network. It's about who you know, because those mentors, those teachers, they're going to get you in front of the right people to make sure you make this dream a reality. And luckily, you know, with going to BYU, who would have thought I would run into Sam Carden, you know, and he would be my mentor, who then get me in touch with all these amazing other people, like Lyle, with like Mike McDonough, with, you know, with Chance Thomas and everything, to make this a dream come true. And then in addition, on top of that, like, your students that you collaborate with, that you meet and everything every day for your classes and whatnot, like, you never know where they're going to go. Like, you never know what path they're going to take, and they're going to want to bring you along. You know, who would have thought that, like, Peter Murray, this incredibly awesome friend of mine, that would eventually end up at Avalanche Software, reach out to me and be like, "Hey, do you wanna come on board? You know, help out?" Like, had it not been for that connection, you know, had not been that moment of like having an awesome friend like Peter, I would have never been able to, you know, do this game, to make this music, to kind of bring joy to all these amazing fans and everything. So networking is so crucial in this world. And I guess that goes for like anything that's kind of art related, you know, whether it's being filmed, commercials, whatnot, like, you know, if being a gaffer, a director, a DP, whatnot, like, connections, that's how you're going to make a living. If this gaffer loves working with you, this DP loves working with you, they're going to talk with other production companies. And I've noticed that quite a bit in my career, where like this one guy, he might have just been doing, you know, lights or something, and I just been a boom operator or something like that. He'd be like, "Hey, this guy's actually really good at doing sound design stuff," you know, to this other, you know, and talk with this other director, and that director's going to reach out to me like, "Hey, we want to bring on board and do sound design stuff, and, you know, oh, you do music as well? Sweet. Well, let's have you do music for all this stuff." And then everybody's talking, and it's all word of mouth. You know, that's usually how it works for me. I don't know, maybe it'd be something different for somebody else. But yeah, just that connection. And then on top of that, having great demos, and don't pigeonhole yourself into a particular style. I know with like production library music, they want you to kind of stick to a particular style that you are really good at because they want you to churn out as much of that music as possible. But for me, I find myself gravitating to all these different kinds of sounds in different styles and genres, which kind of overlaps into other different scores that I write. Like for example, like I'm a jazz pianist, and who would have thought that I'd be implementing some of those jazz elements and everything into my scores, in the style of John Williams, which of course John Williams is the jazz pianist himself. But like, all these different scores and all these different genres, they overlap, they change, they start helping you to adapt and kind of see music differently, as opposed to just being rigid to just classical music, or just like, this is the way it's supposed to be. This is how you write it like this. That's the only path. Whereas if you're able to jump from genre to genre, then you can like, oh, I love what's happening in this style. What if I could try it in this other style and implement that? And so that's why I always say composers, like, try new ideas, try something outside of your wheelhouse, because that's where you're going to grow. That's where you're going to learn, and especially learn not just the instrumentation, but like the theory behind some of these genres and everything. Yeah. So I think those are the three big things I would tell composers. So mentor, connect with people, have really great, variety of music. And I already forgot what the first thing I talked about. So,